Hello and welcome. He's known as the world's most efficient postman, delivering almost any cargo anywhere in the world, especially if it's illicit weapons. The notorious business of arms trafficking has netted Victor Bout hundreds of millions of dollars, but he remains something of a mystery man. Well, as Liberians shot each other to bits in a brutal civil war, Bout was a key resource for the former warlord Charles Taylor. But the Russian national wasn't only fueling the Liberian conflict, he was also providing weapons for numerous wars throughout Africa and to many different groups in Afghanistan, including the Taliban. Victor Bout has been able to operate in Iraq post-US invasion and is currently thought to be supplying Hezbollah. Well, on this show, we look into the dark and largely hidden world of international arms smuggling. Don't forget, we take your questions via phone and mobile text, and the numbers are there on your screen. Joining me now is Douglas Farrar, the former West Africa Bureau Chief for the Washington Post and co-author of The Merchant of Death, Money, Guns, Planes, and the Man Who Makes War Possible, a thoroughly researched book delving into the mysterious world of Victor Bout. Douglas, welcome.
Thank you.
I've got to start off by asking you, who is this man? He's quite mysterious, but yet he's at the top of the sort of wanted list, it seems, according to your research.
Well, he's done a very good job of hiding his footprints for, especially in his early life. He's come on the radar screen of the international intelligence community, the UN researchers and things in more than a decade, and yet he remains at large and living rather tranquilly in Moscow.
How did he get his start? Because obviously a very wealthy man now. He was very young when he started, in his 20s.
He was very young. He came out right as the wall fell and the world started changing very rapidly. The people who know him well say that he was an incredibly smart person who saw the opportunity to take the aircraft that were sitting around on the airstrips of the former Soviet Union with nothing to do, flew a lot of them out to Sharjah, and also had access, because of his background, to the military intelligence stores and weapons stores that were left over, and simply began flying the weapons in and out.
Now, we talked about Charles Taylor there and the Taliban and so on, but who essentially are his main customers?
Well, they're everyone, which is what makes them so interesting. The United Nations, the United States Department of Defense, World Food Program, Charles Taylor, Savimbi in Angola. You have a list of virtually all the bad guys in the world, plus many, many legitimate businesses and governments. The British government has also dealt with them extensively.
So what about his competitors? Who are his direct rivals? Does he represent any kind of group of people that do the same kind of work?
There are certainly many gun runners in the world, and most of them can deliver smaller quantities of AK-47s or rocket-propelled grenades, ammunition. What set Bout apart was his ability to fly into the military bases in the former Soviet bloc, load up his aircraft directly and fly them to wherever he needed to go, and essentially offer a door-to-door service, which was far beyond what most people could offer.
Well, Douglas, what I do want to do is, in the interest, obviously, of some journalistic balance, is get a viewpoint from someone who knows Victor very well. Sure. Here. And we've got on the phone from Moscow, Richard Shishakli. Mr. Shishakli is a long-term friend of Victor Bout. So, Mr. Shishakli, glad you could join us from Moscow. I want to sort of start off by finding out from you your relationship with him and business dealings with him.
Well, Victor Bout is my friend. Victor Bout, I call him a brother. And for a long time, I knew him as such. That's precisely since 1995.
So in terms of business dealings and so on, have you been associated with him in any way?
I knew the business of Victor Bout when Victor Bout was operating out of Sharjah. That's where I was working in that state. And that for a year, I think, 1995 through 1996. I encountered his business one more time in 1998 in South Africa before his business went bankrupt.
Now, I know you're familiar with the book that Douglas Farrar and Stephen Braun have written, Merchant of Death, and I want to ask, you wrote us a strong note in defense of Victor Bout and say that the book about him, Merchant of Death, should be renamed An Illusion by a Delusional Person, saying that there's no evidence that's ever really substantiated any of the allegations against him. So I wonder why then do you think Mr. Bout is such a subject of interest of so many international security agencies?
For a matter of fact, I will let me set you correct, Mr. Khan. The point is, I'm not familiar with the book. I'm not going to buy such a thing. I just found a free chapter, I think, on the internet, and I read as much as I can read before I turn the things down. The authors never seen Victor Bout, never spoke to Victor Bout, nor they are qualified even to discuss this point. The man sitting on the other side there, Mr. Farrar, I don't know how much he knows about gun running, or I don't know how much he knows about aviation, but he seems to be getting his information from somewhere and he put propaganda. That's what I say. Victor Bout ran a very intelligent business system, and he was successful in aviation. He ran very, very successful operation until that point in 2000 or 1999, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think 2000 it was.
Right.
And that when a man with the name Johan Pilleman, just decided to write him with the bad guys because he stopped receiving payment.
I wonder, Mr. Shishakli, I wonder why you think Mr. Bout has then become a target, and just a thought, why has Victor Bout himself been so reluctant to come forward and answer any of the allegations that have been put against him?
He is not reluctant, sir. He did that once at my advice, and we invited a gentleman who called me, that somebody from New York Times, said, I want to meet him, I want to publish the truth, all kind of stuff like this. And he came in here. I attended a few hours of their initial meeting before I had to go to travel to another country. And the man wrote a novel, and now we know why he wrote a novel, because what he wrote is apparently a manuscript. As to why Victor Bout became a target, Victor Bout was the only target possible in Africa, because the other players, they are not Russian, they are not young, they are not unsupported. The same question you can ask why I myself became a target for the United States inability to stop things. They took me for Victor Bout because my name is Richard Shishakli, because I'm from Arabian background, I'm a Syrian origin man. If my name was Robert Smith, probably I would not be talking to you today.
But I do want to thank you for joining us, Mr. Shishakli, from Moscow, and giving us certainly a perspective as a friend of Victor Bout. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure, sir.
Thank you. Well, Douglas, if I can put some of those things to you, I mean, obviously Richard Shishakli thinks that there's been some kind of agenda here. In terms of research and the sort of content you got from the book, what were the sources?
Well, I think if you read the book, you'll find that almost everything is on the record. We talked extensively to his partners, to his pilots, to people who loaded the weapons, to people who worked with him in Europe. And the truth is that we sent Mr. Bout's lawyer an extensive list of questions on numerous occasions. He told us they weren't going to answer. We did the same with Mr. Shishakli. He's posted on his own website his denial, his lawyer's denying us access to him. So it's hard for him to complain on that. But almost everything is on the record.
It sounds like, I mean, judging from a lot of the material that I did read through, that he's sort of protected. There was a sort of interesting dilemma the US, for example, had in using his services, though he was on the wanted list. And just take me through some of that. Why that dilemma?
He's had different levels of protection at different times. He certainly started out under the protection of the former Russian intelligence services as he branched out. The United States found him incredibly useful in Iraq and Afghanistan and failed to move against him, even though they knew who he was and what his companies were doing there for an extended period of time, because there were very few people who would fly under the conditions his pilots would fly under. Now he seems to have retreated to be back under the protection again of the Russian establishment, as it were, and he works through official Russian channels now. And
yet he was working in the sort of post-invasion Iraq, shipping stuff around fairly freely.
Probably flew more than 1,000 flights for the U.S. military, and on each flight was gaining something like $60,000, yes.
I want to put a couple of emails we got to you that it's kind of interesting, the views some of the people had, and one that came from Somerset in the United Kingdom. Nick Reynolds says, Victor Bout is no different from people who sell more and more cigarettes to underdeveloped countries. They just want to make a living the best way they know how.
Yes, but this is a much more lethal trade than cigarettes, and I would argue that if you provide people with the means to kill a greater number of people more easily, you're doing a real disservice to humanity.
We have a call on the line from France. I want to get Bambal on the line with a question. Go ahead, Bambal.
Hello, Mr. Khan.
Hi.
It's evening time message. Good evening, that's why. So they are discussing about the sale of ammunition to the poor countries. The thing is, the advanced and developed countries, they are getting the new technology to develop the arms, and then they have to spoil the old arms. And the people who say are very mysterious, are selling the arms left to right, actually they are not the mysterious people. They are being recruited, and they are being used, and they are working to sell out the arms to the poor countries, and they're creating the wars artificially, and instead of spending a lot of money in destroying the old arms, they are selling them and they're getting the money out of
Okay,
that.
Bamba, let me put that the view
Well,
of.
there is certainly some truth to that. There are excessive stocks of old weapons that need to be, or that don't need to be sold, but that people want to sell, and there's a long client list from the Cold War and then forward of people who are willing to buy those. So certainly there's some truth to the allegation that people sell these in countries where they know they'll be bought.
And there have been some areas where the weapons have been gathered and destroyed post-conflict. Of course, then when conflict resurges, there's a sudden supply for them, a demand for them.
Yes, certainly in West Africa that's the case. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, absolutely. You see that again and again, these small disarmaments, destructions, then massive amounts of weapons instantly available.
Now, I know one of the concerns, obviously, that you point out is that the weapons, I mean, it seems that Victor Bout has no particular ideology. He's not trying to fuel any political agenda, is he?
No, I think that's what's so interesting about him is that he supplied both the Angolan army and the UNITA rebels at the same time. He supplied different sides in the Democratic Republic of Congo and was supplying Massoud of the Northern Alliance while supplying the Taliban. So I would say that's fairly clear evidence of a non-ideological capitalist.
So it's all about the money.
It's all about the money.
So in that case, I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter whether the arms end up in the hands of child soldiers or wherever they're going, basically, as long as they're being sold.
Well, one of the really interesting things in writing the book was tracking the offensives in Sierra Leone, and I was covering the wars in Sierra Leone for the Washington Post, and then looking at when his flights arrived. You can track almost exactly the main offensives of the Revolutionary United Front, which are known for the amputations of the arms and legs of men, women, and children, with the weapons deliveries that Bout was doing, and I would say there's a fairly direct correlation there.
And I think, and having heard you do other interviews as well on this subject, it seemed to affect you more than anything else, seeing the impact of these kind of conflicts where there are children involved as soldiers, where there is this kind of brutal use of terror and amputation and so on.
I think one would be less than human if one could go to those camps and look at children who had their arms hacked off by crazed other children for no purpose whatsoever except that someone wanted power and not be deeply, deeply affected by the lives destroyed.
And the point being that I think you said that really you felt that you wanted to be able to tell a story because, to sort of cut into this chain.
Absolutely. I think that it's really important, not Victor Bout so much as an individual, as the machinery that allows this type of weapon sales to go forward and the destruction that it does, because if you're sitting behind a desk just doing this stuff, you don't maybe realize or have the graphic feel for what the impact of what your actions are downstream, and it's horrendous.
There's an email that came in from the United Kingdom, and I'll put this one to you as well, Douglas. It says, from Colin Hargreaves. Colin says, the problem for the US in getting rid of such men is that they blend in very well with CIA operations around the globe, and they're like creatures under a rock. They prefer to stay out of the limelight.
Well, there's no question that he blends in with the intelligence services in many different countries, including the U.S. services, I would say, and his ability to work in Iraq and Afghanistan while under sanction by an executive order signed by President Bush is fairly clear evidence that he blends in very well, yes.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, there was that executive order back in July 2004, and then there was one from the Department of Treasury, I think in May 2005, yes, saying that no U.S. citizen or entity should do business with this man.
Yes, that's right, and including Mr. Chichakli was on the second list there of people who were not allowed to do business, and that simply didn't stop the military from continuing what they were doing with him, because in Iraq you had very difficult flying conditions, very rough airstrips, and people were not willing to fly there that much, and so they needed the equipment, so they were willing to make a deal with the devil to have it happen.
And his older planes were actually more capable.
Absolutely, his pilots are brilliant, and they stand up to that sort of abuse much better than other.
So why is it you think no one's really gone after someone like a Victor Bout, or Victor Bout in particular, more effectively in trying to stop the operations?
Well, I think largely because the intelligence community and law enforcement communities are still stuck in the 1940s, essentially, whereas Victor Bout is very much in the 21st century. He switches his company's registrations, he wires his money to different groups around the world, he hides his tracks incredibly well through the computer age, through his registration of where his aircrafts are and things, and the intelligence communities and law enforcement communities are simply plodding along as if they were in the 1950s and are always way, way, way behind what he's done.
Have you seen, I mean, there is one concern a lot of the time here when they talk about security in the US, for example, they talk about the fear of dirty bombs and all kinds of things like this. Is Victor Bout the kind of person who'd get his hands on a nuclear weapon?
I think he certainly could. I think maybe he has some moral constraints left and he wouldn't, or maybe for the right price he would. I don't know. But he certainly is among the people who would have access to those in the former Soviet bloc, absolutely.
So do you see anything in all the research you've done, have you seen anything that shows a sign of improvement, that the authorities, the intelligence agencies in the US and outside actually want to do something or will try to do something about trying to stop the kind of gun running, trafficking and easy movement of arms that people like Victor Bout seem to be able to do?
I think it's gotten significantly worse in recent years. I think one of the tragedies of both the Iraq War, is sucking up all the energy of the government and focus of the intelligence community, and the simple mentality of many people in government that this is not a high enough priority to dedicate resources to is prevalent, and we really do not see much progress being made at all. In fact, I'd say we're paying less attention than we were in 2000.
But presumably Viktor Bout has stopped being useful to the US government.
Yes, I would say that there is some interest in him now because of the appearance of weapons flying into both Somalia and Lebanon last year. Somalia, in the current situation, that has again put him on the other side of where our policies are and where we want to be. So he's again sort of the enemy, but not enough to mount a significant effort to catch him.
How did he get so entrenched, do you think, in so many different places at once? How was he able to work both sides so effectively?
Well, as one of the people said in our book, you never shoot the postman. And as you said earlier, you know, his mantra was to deliver the packages wherever they needed to go and deliver them on time, coupled with his ability to also deliver things like attack helicopters, anti-tank systems, surface-to-air missiles that most weapons procurers could not get their hands on, at least not in a short period of time. And he was very good at doing that very quickly. And people knew who he was selling to on the other side. They simply didn't have anyone else to replace him with on their side, and so they kept going back to him.
Do you think, Douglas, anyone can stop him?
Absolutely. I think that it wouldn't be that hard to put in effective controls on things like end-user certificates, which are the certificates that a government issues saying that these weapons are being sold for the purposes of our military and we won't sell them. All the easily forgeable documents could be made much more difficult to forge. All the mechanisms he uses for false aircraft registration could be remedied administratively in most countries if they wanted to do it.
Well, Douglas Farron, I want to thank you very much for coming in and talking with us about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. On tomorrow's show, we talk to Dr. Farouk Al-Baz about the discovery of an ancient lake bed in Sudan, a development that could improve the lives of Darfurians. And don't forget, if you have a question about that or any other thoughts, send us an email to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk's coming up next.